When you look at the map of states passing plug-in solar laws, you start to see different philosophies emerge. Some states treat it like a mini interconnection project with heavy utility involvement. Some treat it purely as an appliance. And then there's Vermont. Vermont looked at the landscape and made a very specific, very deliberate choice. Keep it simple for the consumer, but anchor the safety firmly in national standards.
Exactly. Vermont's approach is fascinating because of what it doesn't require. It doesn't require you to ask your utility for permission. It doesn't even require you to notify your utility when you plug it in. But it does require that the product you buy meets strict national safety certifications. It's a law built for a market that is still arriving.
Today, we're going behind the bill in Vermont. We're looking at S-202, which was signed into law by Governor Phil Scott on June 16, 2026. This made Vermont the 8th state in the country to legalize plug-in solar.
We're going to hear from the people who made it happen. Senator Ann Watson, who sponsored the bill and used her background as a physics teacher to navigate the technical questions. And Ben Edgerly Walsh from VPIRG, the Vermont Public Interest Research Group, who helped build the grassroots momentum to get it across the finish line.
It's a story about stripping away unnecessary gatekeeping, navigating the realities of renter access, and future-proofing a law so that when the technology catches up, the legal pathway is already wide open. Let's get into it. Welcome to Plug-in Solar Explained. I'm Lisa, your consumer advocate.
And I'm Mike, your policy and technical expert.
This is Behind the Bill, our special series where we dig into the state laws that are making plug-in solar legal across the country. Today, we're heading to the Green Mountain State, Vermont S-202. To understand how plug-in solar came to Vermont, we have to look at the broader national and international context. Vermont's journey to legalizing plug-in solar really started when Senator Ann Watson heard about what was happening out west. Utah had just passed their groundbreaking law, and it caught her attention immediately.
Right. The idea seemed perfectly matched to Vermont's ethos and its ongoing energy transition. It was small-scale, practical, renewable, and something that ordinary residents could easily understand without needing an engineering degree. It offered a way for people to generate some of their own power without having to go through the massive, complicated, and often expensive process required for traditional rooftop solar.
For so many households across the country, solar has always felt like an all-or-nothing decision. If you own a home with a good, structurally sound roof, and you have enough capital or credit, and you can navigate the permitting, the contractor bids, and the utility interconnection agreements, you can get rooftop solar. But if you're a renter, or you live in a condo, or your roof is shaded by trees, or it's just too old to support panels, you're usually entirely out of luck.
Plug-in solar fundamentally changes that dynamic. It treats small, customer-owned generation as a consumer-facing product. It's something you buy to offset part of your home's electricity use, rather than a permanent construction project on your property. It shifts the paradigm from home improvement to home appliance.
Senator Watson's interest in bringing this to Vermont was shaped by three main things. First, Utah showed that a U.S. state could actually create a legal pathway for this. They proved it wasn't just a theoretical concept. Second, Europe showed that small balcony and portable solar systems could become totally normal, familiar consumer products. In countries like Germany, millions of these systems are already deployed.
And the third thing was her own background. Senator Watson is a former physics teacher. She was careful to say she isn't an electrical expert, but her science background gave her the comfort level needed to engage with the complex electricity, grid, and safety questions that inevitably come up when you try to pass an energy bill. She wasn't intimidated by the technical details of voltage, amperage, or grid backfeeding.
That combination of factors made plug-in solar feel like a very practical Vermont idea. It wasn't meant to replace rooftop solar, which remains a critical part of the state's energy mix. It was meant to expand participation in renewable energy to the exact people who hadn't had an easy path before. Now, you might be wondering, why does Vermont even need this specific type of legislation? Vermont already has a Renewable Energy Standard that requires distribution utilities to reach 100% renewable electricity by 2035. They are already a national leader in clean energy. So why does a small, consumer-owned solar device matter in a state that's already moving so aggressively toward renewable power?
It's a fair question, and Senator Watson's answer to that was incredibly straightforward. First, from a grid perspective, any additional renewable generation in the ISO New England region can still help offset fossil fuel generation somewhere on the broader regional grid. The grid is interconnected, so local generation still has regional benefits.
But the second reason is just as important, if not more so, for the average person paying the bills every month. A small system can help a household directly reduce its own electric bill.
And in Vermont, those bills are high and climbing. The average residential electricity rate in Vermont is around 22.4 cents per kilowatt hour. Plus, they have time of use peak spreads of about 8 cents per kilowatt hour. That means electricity is expensive as a baseline, and it gets even more expensive when demand is highest, typically in the late afternoon and early evening when people get home from work.
So plug-in solar becomes both a renewable energy tool and a critical affordability tool. It's not going to power your entire home. It's not going to run your electric vehicle or your heat pump all by itself. It's not going to solve the region's electricity demand challenges single-handedly. But it gives more residents a direct, tangible way to participate in clean energy and feel a little less exposed to those constantly rising utility costs.
For Senator Watson, this consumer lens really mattered. Her goal wasn't just to pass another high-level renewable energy mandate for utilities to figure out. Her goal was to make the pathway simple, straightforward, and low hassle for everyday residents who just want to save a little money and do their part.
To get a bill like this passed, you need more than just a willing sponsor. You need public momentum. And that's where Ben Edgerly Walsh and VPIRG came in.
VPIRG is the Vermont Public Interest Research Group. They are Vermont's largest environmental and consumer protection advocacy organization, with roughly 25,000 members and supporters across the state. They do a lot of state legislative policy, public education, and grassroots advocacy.
VPIRG launched its plug-in solar effort in the summer of 2025. They saw Utah's law, connected with advocates, and started working with elected officials, especially Senator Watson. They formally kicked off the effort with a press conference later that year.
And the public response was unusually positive. Walsh pointed out that a lot of climate and energy policies are incredibly important, but they're also very abstract. Plug-in solar is different. It's tangible.
Exactly. VPIRG could bring a panel and a plug-in unit to an event, and people could immediately understand the concept. They could look at it and picture it on their own balcony or their deck or in their yard. That shortened the path from awareness to actual interest.
And for VPIRG, the core issue driving all of this was access. They framed plug-in solar around the people who hadn't had a practical path into direct renewable energy participation.
Walsh emphasized that the group of people excluded from traditional solar isn't random. Because of Vermont's rental demographics, the residents left out of direct solar access are disproportionately lower income and disproportionately Vermonters of color.
About 27% of Vermont households are renter-occupied. That's over 73,000 households. Plug-in solar doesn't solve the equity problem overnight, but it makes a new kind of access possible. You don't need to own a roof. You don't need a yard suitable for a permanent ground-mounted array. You just need a sunny spot and a plug.
One of the most distinctive and fascinating parts of Vermont's law is what it doesn't require.
Right. When Senator Watson first drafted the bill, she included a utility notification requirement. Early conversations suggested that utilities would want to know where these plug-in systems were being installed on their grid.
But during testimony, something surprising happened. The utilities actually changed their position. They concluded that small, compliant systems would mostly just look like reduced load on the house.
The analogy that really helped define Vermont's final approach was the refrigerator. Utilities do not require customers to notify them when they go out and buy a more efficient refrigerator.
If a small plug-in solar device is primarily just offsetting on-site use, the utilities realized they didn't see much value in collecting thousands of notifications that they weren't going to act on anyway.
So the final bill completely removed the utility notification requirement. Vermont's approach is to treat plug-in solar as a consumer product, governed by safety standards, rather than as a miniature interconnection project.
Now, to be precise, the law says the Public Utility Commission must develop a simple notification form by September 2026. But electric distribution companies may require customers to submit it after installation. They are not forced to require it. The notification is post-installation and entirely at the utility's discretion. There is no mandatory notification requirement written into the law itself.
And utility approval is completely waived. Utilities cannot require prior approval, they cannot charge fees, and they cannot require additional equipment. You can install up to 1,200 watts per meter without asking Green Mountain Power or any other utility for permission. Senator Watson described the legislative process as surprisingly smooth. The main concern wasn't broad political opposition. The main concern was safety.
And Vermont addressed that concern by anchoring the law firmly in national standards. Instead of asking state lawmakers to write their own technical electrical rules from scratch, the final framework relies entirely on UL 3700 compliance and National Electrical Code compliance.
In fact, Vermont is one of the first states to name UL 3700 directly in enacted legislation. The law explicitly states that devices must comply with UL 3700 for plug-in photovoltaic systems by UL Solutions, or an equivalent certification.
That standards-first approach made the bill much easier to defend. But it also created a practical limitation. The law opens a pathway, but consumers still need compliant products that actually meet that standard.
As the article puts it, Vermont may be ready before the market is fully ready. And that means the next stage depends heavily on product certification, consumer labeling, retailer education, and clear guidance for residents. Let's talk about renters, because they were one of the original reasons this bill mattered so much to both Senator Watson and VPIRG.
Renters and condo owners are the primary beneficiaries of this technology. But Vermont's renter story is more nuanced than simply saying the law unlocks plug-in solar for every tenant immediately.
Walsh explained that because Vermont embraced UL 3700 without adding a separate small system plug-and-play carve-out, near-term compliance systems might require wiring, an isolated circuit, or other electrical work, and renters absolutely cannot proceed with electrical work without their landlord's permission.
Senator Watson made the same point. Renters remain the intended beneficiary, but if an electrician has to be involved, that limits the near-term usefulness. Condo owners and property owners might benefit sooner while the technology and the standards continue to evolve.
But one of the most important late-session issues involved landlord rights and tenant access. Walsh said one version of the bill could have effectively given landlords a permanent blanket veto over tenant systems unless Vermont later amended the law.
Under Senator Watson's leadership, the Senate changed that language. The final structure recognizes a practical safety rule. A tenant cannot cause electrical work to be done in a rental unit without permission. So in the near term, landlords still have practical control if wiring is required. But the law is designed not to give landlords a permanent no. The law includes a tenant notice provision. Tenants must give 10 days written notice to their landlord before installing a device. The landlord can impose reasonable restrictions within those 10 days, including requiring a licensed electrician. But if the landlord doesn't respond within 10 days, the tenant can proceed. The goal is to avoid a blanket veto. Once compliance systems are available that don't require wiring and function more like simple appliances, landlords shouldn't be able to block them without a valid reason. That's why Vermont's law is described as future-proof. It protects a future pathway for renters once no wiring systems become practical.
There are a couple of other unique quirks to Vermont's law that we need to cover. The first is how it interacts with net metering.
Right. In Vermont, plug-in solar is not eligible for net metering. Any excess generation you feed back into the grid will not be compensated. You are only offsetting your own usage.
And the law goes a step further. Customers who already have an existing net metering system cannot also install a plug-in solar device. It's an either-or situation.
The other unique provision is that Vermont requires these devices to be connected to smart meters only. That might exclude some older buildings that haven't had their meters upgraded yet, so residents need to check their equipment.
One major victory in this bill that we haven't touched on yet is for homeowners living in communities with homeowner associations.
Yes, this is a huge deal. Vermont S-202 explicitly states that deed restrictions, covenants, or similar binding agreements cannot prohibit or have the effect of prohibiting portable solar energy generation devices from being installed. If you live in an HOA, they cannot tell you that you are not allowed to use a plug-in solar device on your own property.
This is a common barrier for traditional rooftop solar. HOAs often cite aesthetic concerns to block visible panels on roofs. But by explicitly voiding those restrictions for portable plug-in devices, Vermont has removed a significant legal hurdle for thousands of homeowners.
It's another example of the state actively clearing the path for adoption. But clearing the legal path doesn't mean the practical path is ready. And that brings us to what happens next. The bill is signed, the law is active, but the next phase is all about implementation.
Walsh identified the main bottleneck as the availability of UL 3700 certified systems. At the time of his interview, certified systems were not yet widely on the market. Consumers need to know which products are compliant, and retailers need confidence in what they're selling.
Senator Watson emphasized consumer labeling. Ideally, someone could eventually walk into a local hardware store, see a clearly labeled compliant product, and understand exactly what it can and cannot do. But right now, if you search online, you'll find a wild west of products. Some might be safe, some might not be, and it's very difficult for an average consumer to tell the difference.
That's where independent information hubs become critical. VPIRG members are already asking where they can buy these systems. A neutral source of information can help residents avoid confusion and prevent them from wasting money on non-compliant products that don't meet Vermont's legal or safety requirements. So, how does this actually scale up? Consumer education is going to be huge. VPIRG has been talking with the Vermont Natural Resources Council, which works with town energy committees around the state.
Those local committees are going to be the boots on the ground. They can help residents understand the technology, navigate the rules, and figure out the practical steps once compliant products are actually available.
But Walsh expects adoption to spread the way rooftop solar often spreads, through visibility and word of mouth. A renter sees a friend's system. A condo owner notices a neighbor's device. A resident hears that someone is saving a little money and starts asking questions.
Because plug-in solar is smaller, cheaper, and much more visible at ground or balcony level than a rooftop array, that peer-to-peer effect could be incredibly strong. The savings might be modest compared to a full rooftop system, but relative to the upfront investment, the product becomes very compelling, especially if hardware costs continue to fall while electric rates continue to rise.
Walsh also sees plug-in solar as a gateway technology. Instead of telling households they have to follow a strict sequence, efficiency first, then electrification, then solar, then storage, he argues we should meet people where their interest begins.
If a small plug-in solar panel is what gets someone excited about clean energy, that is a perfectly valid starting point. A young renter who uses plug-in solar in an apartment today might buy a home in 5 years and immediately consider rooftop solar.
Or a household that sees value from a small plug-in system might later consider a backup battery, a heat pump, an EV, or additional efficiency upgrades. It gets them on the ladder.
Senator Watson's framing points in the exact same direction. She described plug-in solar as empowering for grid-connected customers because it gives them a way to generate some of their own renewable electricity. Even if the system is small, the psychological shift can be massive. A consumer becomes an energy participant, not just a passive energy bill payer.
As we wrap up, it's worth asking, what can other states learn from Vermont's process? Because Vermont didn't just pass a bill. They provided a roadmap for how to handle the inevitable hurdles.
The first major lesson is that simplicity matters. By aggressively removing unnecessary utility processes, like pre-approval and mandatory notification, Vermont made a small consumer technology actually feel like a consumer option, rather than a heavy regulatory project.
The second lesson is about safety language. Vermont completely avoided the trap of trying to write state-specific technical electrical rules. They leaned entirely on UL 3700 and the National Electrical Code. That immediately addressed the safety concerns of utilities and firefighters, even if it means waiting for the market to catch up with certified products.
The third lesson is about policy design. Walsh noted that one regret from Vermont's process was that advocates didn't lay the groundwork from the very beginning for a small system, pure plug-and-play carve-out, like the 391-watt approach we've seen discussed in other states.
Right. Adding a new carve-out late in the legislative session is much harder than defending one that has been in the bill from the start. So for advocates in other states, decide your ideal policy structure early and stick to it.
And the final lesson is the power of public excitement. Many energy policies require long, complicated explanations before people care enough to contact their lawmakers. Plug-in solar is different. Once people understand the idea, they get interested very quickly. That grassroots enthusiasm is a massive asset when you're trying to move a proactive clean energy policy through a legislature.
Senator Watson's final message to Vermont residents was very straightforward. If you do not already have solar, especially if you are a renter or condo owner, plug-in solar is worth watching. Eventually, it will be worth looking for at local hardware stores as compliant products arrive.
And Walsh described the larger promise this way. Plug-in solar could become the first form of renewable energy that is truly accessible to almost everyone. Vermont is not fully there yet. Product certification, wiring questions, and renter access still need to mature. But the legal pathway is now wide open.
That is the heart of Vermont's contribution to the national plug-in solar movement. The state didn't pretend the market was finished. They didn't overcomplicate the utility process. They treated safety seriously, removed notification, and protected a future pathway for renters once no wiring systems become practical.
If those pieces come together, Vermont's law may be remembered not simply as a plug-in solar bill, but as a model for consumer access. Simple now, broader later, and built for a market that is still arriving.
Let's get to the bottom line. Mike, what are the key takeaways from Vermont's S202?
Number 1, simplicity matters. By removing unnecessary utility notification and approval processes, Vermont made a small consumer technology feel like a real consumer option rather than a regulatory headache.
Number 2, safety through national standards. Vermont leaned entirely on UL 3700 and the National Electrical Code, instead of creating state-specific technical rules. It addresses safety concerns, even if it means waiting for the market to catch up with certified products.
And number 3, future-proofing renter access. The law recognizes that near-term systems might require wiring and landlord permission, but by creating a 10-day notice provision and avoiding a blanket landlord veto, Vermont protected a future pathway for renters once appliance-like, no wiring systems become widely available.
If you want to read the full text of Vermont's S202 or track where plug-in solar bills are moving in other states, head over to pluginsolarus.com and check out the state tracker.
And if you're in Vermont and wondering how much a 1,200-watt system could save you against those 22-cent electricity rates, use the savings calculator on the site.
Thanks for going behind the bill with us. We'll catch you next time on Plug-in Solar Explained.